Ahoy everybody, Commodore Vice here with another episode of Navigating the Game, the series where I teach you how to play and I teach you about the lore of tabletop RPGs. We're doing 7th C 2nd edition right now, and this video specifically is going to be about the GM's Tool Kit. Things like danger points, how to run bad guys, and how to do stories. So yeah, we'll just hop right into that. Danger points are basically the equivalent to hero points for a GM. They're something that the GM can spend to kind of improve their odds of doing something or be a detriment to the players. You fill a danger pool with points. Very simply, you get 1 point per player into the danger pool at the beginning of every session. So if you've got 4 players and you're beginning a session, the GM starts with 4 danger points. You can also get danger points by purchasing unused dice. I kind of go over this a little bit in the hero points section in an earlier video, but basically what happens is that when you roll dice pool, you will make your groups of 10 to complete one single raise, and sometimes you'll have dice left over. So what the GM can do is purchase that dice, and basically how that transaction goes is you give the player a hero point for each one of the dice you want to purchase, and then you will also get a danger point for each hero point you give. So it's a good way to build up your pool and help your players get a little extra hero point currency to do some crazy stuff later on. Now, danger points can be spent in a number of ways. You can spend 1 danger point to increase the number needed for a risk by 5. So basically what this means is when the heroes are rolling for a risk or a turn in an action sequence, instead of having to get a group of 10 to make 1 raise, they would have to get a group of 15 to make 1 raise, which can definitely increase the difficulty of a round of combat or a single risk by quite a bit. You can also spend a danger point to give a villain 2 additional dice into their dice pool. You can actually do this one multiple times, meaning like you can spend 3 danger points and give a villain 6 additional dice, which is a pretty big boon. You can spend a danger point to activate a Brute Squad special ability. We'll be getting into Brute Squads a little later in the video. You can also spend a danger point to activate a Villains special ability. Also, we'll be getting to that later on in the video. And finally, you can spend a danger point to murder a helpless hero. I went over how this works a little earlier in one of the other videos, but I'll go over it again really quick. When a hero gets to the helpless point on their health tracker, a villain can approach them, spend 1 danger point and all of their raises, and say, I am going to murder this helpless hero. And the only way to stop that hero from dying by the end of that round is for another hero to spend a hero point and all of their raises to stop it. So, that can be pretty intense. I do, before we finish off the danger point section, want to make a small note. You shouldn't spend danger points all willy-nilly. They kind of lose their value at that point. I would suggest, as a GM, to spend danger points only when you want a situation to feel particularly tense. For example, let's say you are introducing a new villain, and you want them to feel like this villain is particularly dangerous. You can spend that danger point to increase the number they need to make 1 raise by 5 for that entire encounter, and it can make the villain seem a bit harder. They're definitely supposed to be used for dramatic effect, and they definitely help in the aspect of dramatic effect, and shouldn't necessarily just be used to dick over your players. Alright, so getting into Brute Squads. A Brute Squad is essentially going to be a group of minion bad guys. When you think an action movie, you've got your villain, and then you've got your minions. Your minions tend to be, the nameless guys who are working for the villain. Brute Squads are very easily defeated, sort of fodder bad guys for action scenes. how brute squads work. Essentially, a brute squad will have a strength value. So, like, a strength value of 5 is typical, but you can have, like, a brute squad with a strength value of 2, and whatnot, and so forth. Now, what this strength value means is that at the end of a round, or the end of a risk, or, you know how the action sequence have the rounds when everybody's spent all of their raises? At the end of that round, a brute squad will deal its strength in damage to a single hero. They can't split their damage at all, but they will deal their strength and damage to a single hero. So say you've got a brute squad 5, right? And they make it to the end of the round, still at strength 5. They will deal 5 wounds to a single hero. That's how they work. Now, to take on a brute squad, the heroes basically would spend raises to deal wounds to the brute squad, except the wounds, instead of being tracked like our regular characters, each raise spent to damage a brute squad lowers its strength by 1. Unless you have a duelist, which we'll get into that in a later video too. But basically, so if a single hero is encountering that brute squad of 5, right? Well, they spend 3 raises during their turn to lower its strength by 3, which would leave them at a strength of 2, meaning at the end of the round, they only deal 2 damage. Now, brute squads are pretty easy fodder and pretty easy to get out of the way. I would also like to note that fighting and damage are not the only way to lower a brute squad's strength. Say a hero's approach is Intimidate and Panache. They could spend raises to lower the strength of a brute squad by scaring off some of its members. So, just as a little role-play note there, it doesn't have to be combat, but that's how you lower the strength of a brute squad. When it reaches 0, the brute squad disbands. That's the basic situation there. Brute squads, at first they seem kind of intimidating. Like, you might throw 2 strength 5 brute squads at a group of 4 heroes. They are not going to last. I'm going to tell you that right now. Brute squads, you can be very liberal with how many brute squads you throw at players, simply because they are so easy to kind of get out of the way. Especially if you have a duelist. Duelists deal a lot of damage, and they can pretty much take on a strength 5 brute squad by themselves without breaking a sweat. So, feel free to be a little liberal with how many brute squads you throw at your players. Also, I noted earlier in the danger point section that brute squads have special abilities that you can activate by spending a danger point, and that depends on what type of brute squad you have. In the core book, there are 5 basic types. There's the guard brute squad, which, if you spend a danger point, will redirect an attack from a villain to themselves. There's the assassin brute squad, which, if you spend a danger point, will deal their damage up front instead of at the end of the round. There's the duelist brute squad, which can attack twice. There's the pirate brute squad, which will kidnap an NPC. And then there's the thieves brute squad, which can steal an item. There's additional notes on how these abilities work. I would suggest getting the book. I'm not going to put all of the how-to play in here. This is more of just a guide to get it a little easier for those who don't learn by reading or who don't have the time to sit down and read through the entire book. But there's more notes on how that works in the book. Now we're getting into one of my favorite parts of the entirety of this game, and that is villains. You may ask, what is a villain? If you are, I don't know where you've been hiding, but I'll explain it anyway. The villains are going to be like your Hans Grubers, your named bad guys who show up, like your bad guy lieutenants, or your big bad guy who's like the one that the entire group is going after for all the awful things he's done. They're not going to be your nameless enemies. These are people who are influential and powerful. Now, how villains work in this system is actually pretty simple and pretty powerful. So these are not characters to just kind of brush aside. These can be pretty intimidating characters. Basically, a villain's stats are composed of they get an arcana, just like a regular hero. They get, the hubris and the virtue that they can use. They get advantages, just like heroes do, and they also get what's called a villainy rank. Now, villainy rank is going to be the only stat really they have. They don't have traits and skills like regular heroes do. And how you figure out villainy rank is going to be a mixture of two smaller like substats, and that's strength and influence. Now, strength is basically like the measure of a villain's personal capabilities, how strong they are, how fast they are, how good they are with a sword. Basically anything that is theirs personally, how smart they are. It's not a measure of their assets, it's a matter of their skill. And then you've got influence. Now, influence is a measure of their assets as opposed to their skill. How connected they are, how many political webs they have woven that can help them out in this situation. And basically, how these two substats work towards villainy rank is going to be, say you've got a strength 3, influence 2 villain, right? That villain will have a villainy rank of 5. So you're basically just adding the strength and the influence to get your villainy rank. And villains come in many different ranks. Like a rank 5 villain is basically your low-level mobster, whereas a rank 20 villain that's pretty much the height of where you want to go. You don't want to go over 20 usually, because those are like the mythic bad guys. Those are like the ones everybody tells stories of. They're like Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean. They are the tough, hard to kill, mysterious creatures, you know. Not always creatures, but just like they're really intimidating bad guys, and they are really powerful. But basically, since they don't have traits or skills, this villainy rank acts as their dice pool. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because when you have a hero and you approach a scene, you put your trait and your skill together to get your dice pool. A villain can roll up to their villainy rank as their approach. And when I say up to, because a villain doesn't have to give all of their effort up front. Sometimes they don't want somebody to know how strong they really are. So a rank 20 villain could only roll 5 dice, and they'd be like, oh, this guy's a chump. And then the next round he rolls 20, and they're like, oh, okay, never mind. But basically what this means is, if you were paying attention in the previous videos, when a hero figures out their approach, if an action doesn't match their approach, like say they rolled a panache intimidate, and they decide to attack with a sword instead, that would cost them an additional raise because it doesn't match their approach. Since villains don't have a trait skill combination, they can spend their raises however they want. They don't have to match an approach, which is actually really strong, because they will never pay an extra raise because an action doesn't match their approach, which is pretty intimidating when you're considering characters that already have like a dice pool of 10 no matter what action they're taking. So yeah, that's how villains kind of work in this whole thing. It's really intense, it's really intimidating, but there are ways to kind of weaken villains. A little bit we're going to get into how you can lower a villain's influence, and if you lower their influence, you obviously lower their villainy rank, which will make them easier to take on later on. So, first big part about playing a villain, or GM running a villain. Villains scheme. And basically how schemes are going to work is they are obviously a villain's plots to increase their own influence. How this works in-game, you basically decide what a villain's goal is going to be. Say they want to get something done or something like that. You decide what their goal is. And then, and the goal should always be very action-oriented. It should be active, not reactionary. For example, defend my base isn't a good goal because it's reactionary. They are reacting to somebody else's actions on them. It's also pretty vague and doesn't necessarily end in action. A good one would be assassinate my enemy. You know, assassinate my specific enemy, because it's something that they are actively taking part in, because villains are always active. They are always working towards their goal. and it ends in action. And the reason why ending in action is so important is because it gives your players an opportunity to thwart them. Because you see the way schemes work is let's use that example. Let's say I'm going to assassinate my enemy, my specific enemy, and I'm going to invest a number of influence into that. Now, what the villain would do is say they invest 2 points of their influence in that scheme. Now, they can't spend that influence. We'll get into how to spend influence in a second, but they can't spend that influence, and that influence is kind of tied to that scheme. So if that scheme fails, they lose that influence, which would make them weaker, which would make it easier for the heroes to take them on. However, if their scheme succeeds, then they double the amount of influence they invested and get it back, which can make them more powerful and make their dice pools larger. It can definitely make a villain more intimidating. Now, how you would use influence after getting some back in a scheme is very simple. It's spent kind of like a currency as opposed to strength. You can spend 2 influence to hire a villain of strength 5, or you can spend 4 influence to hire a villain of strength 10. This is basically like a villain hiring a lieutenant or a lackey or a specific individual who is potentially powerful. On the lower end of things, a villain can spend 1 influence and get a strength 10 brute squad, because they're cheap, dime a dozen fighters. Now, I know what you're probably thinking right now is, well, if there's rules for a villain hiring another villain or hiring a brute squad, do I have to spend their influence anytime I want to introduce a brute squad? Not necessarily. Not all brute squads are going to be sent directly from the villain. Like, for example, if your group gets in trouble with the town guard and they have to face that brute squad of 10, your villain doesn't have to spend that influence. It's an unrelated situation of a brute squad of 10. These rules are specifically for any villain or brute squad the villain is specifically sending at your group. So it's like them hiring assassins, basically. You can also spend influence to convince an ally to turn on a hero. The cost of this is going to be a number of influence equal to the hero's panache. You can use influence to bribe an officer or an official, which is just 1 influence. You can discover a rival NPC's identity, 1 influence. You can discover a hero's identity, which is going to be a number of influence equal to that hero's wits. You can find a secret location, 1 influence, or you can escape a scene, which is going to cost you a number of influence equal to the highest trait amongst all the heroes. Now, what this means is by spending that number of influence, say you're in an action scene, we'll even take it further and say, look at movies. When the villain gets cornered by the heroes and he pulls a lever and there's a secret door, that would be what this expenditure is. If you spend a number of influence equal to the highest trait of the heroes present, you'll be able to escape the scene. As the GM, you can narrate the villain escaping through like some escape hatch or some situation that has made it advantageous for them to escape. So that's how you spend influence. Now, strength is a little bit different. Strength isn't something you'll be using as often like influence. It's not really a currency, and it can't really be lowered like influence by interrupting schemes. How strength functions is, like I said, villains get advantages. They get a number of advantages equal to 5 points plus their strength. So say you've got a strength 5 villain, right? So you would get 10 points of advantages. Also, what strength does is anytime an advantage or an ability would require a specific trait number, like say this advantage does a number of wounds equal to your rating in weaponry or in brawn. When it asks for a specific trait or a skill and you're using it with a villain, that trait or skill will be equal to half of their strength. So going back to, villains, let's say you've got a strength 4 villain. If an advantage says it will do a number of damage equal to their rating in brawn, since their strength is 4, it would be half that. So their brawn would be considered 2. Also, the last thing about villains, at least specifically as it comes down to mechanics, is going to be something I think I might have touched on earlier, is villainous pressure. As I've said, pressure is when one character spends a raise that has to be matched by another character, or in order to do something that they're influenced. For example, say one character challenges another character to a duel. That would be pressure. They would spend a raise to do that. Now, if the opposing character wants to do anything other than accept that challenge and fight, it will cost them an additional raise. Villains can do that to a higher extent. Basically, what they'll do is they'll spend a raise and a danger point to, like, challenge the heroes or to influence them in some way. And basically what this will do is that it will put pressure on all of the heroes. Not just one, but everybody. So everybody will have to either do that action or spend an additional raise to do something other than the action the villain wants them to do. And that's basically villains in a nutshell. And actually we're about to get into something a little different. And by different, I mean monsters. Now, they're not a whole lot different, whereas villains are your human, just bad guys. Monsters are going to be your creatures of the night. I mean, we are talking about a general fantasy setting. You know, vampires, werewolves, dragons, sea monsters, ghouls, ghasts, ghosts, all that sort of stuff kind of fall under monsters. And they basically function like brute squads or villains with some minor differences. Like, mainly if you've got like a monster villain, you have to figure out if they're going to be human or feral. And by this I mean, for example, say your villain is a vampire. Now, a vampire villain is going to function like a regular villain, except they're going to be able to get monster qualities that fit their style of monster. And these are all going to be in the book under monsters. There's lists of monster abilities, and it's going to be things like teleportation, feeding on blood, stuff like that. And they act kind of like advantages. You spend a danger point and you get to activate them. But they don't have to be bought. It's basically just kind of on what makes sense scale. Especially if it's a villain, they get as many monstrous qualities as makes sense for them. But the reason I say it, you have to figure out if they're going to be human or feral, is because, like I said, the human ones are going to act like regular villains, except they're going to have monstrous qualities. They're going to have an influence and a strength. However, feral monsters are not likely to have influence at all. I mean, you're not going to see a kraken walk into port and start politically scheming, usually. However you want to run your game, cool, but that's not a typical thing. So feral monsters are usually going to be all strength, no influence. But, a whole bunch of monstrous qualities as well. And then there's the monster brute squads, which, once again, they function like regular brute squads, except they have monstrous qualities. Now, monster brute squads typically have 1 or 2 monstrous qualities, as opposed to monstrous villains, who can have as many as they want. And that's simply for the sake of ease, and you don't want to make a brute squad, really dangerous, simply because they're supposed to be basically fodder. So, yeah, monstrous brute squads are basically like regular brute squads with some monstrous qualities. Now we get to the final part of the video, and the final part of this section of the GM's Tool Kit, and that's going to be Gamemaster Stories. Now, what is a GM story? Well, in hero creation, we went over what a hero's story is. a Game Master story is very similar. It's going to have the goal, it's going to have the steps, and it's going to have the reward. The only difference is going to be that the person running the game, designing the story and the world, is going to be the one who makes these stories. They're going to decide a goal, and the first step, as usual, and then you're going to be working towards that goal, and once you get to that goal, you get a reward. Now, usually in hero stories, you have the reward already figured out. How GM stories work is basically you figure out once you accomplished the goal. So if it's a 3-step story or a 4-step story, once you accomplish the goal, you get a reward that is within that 4 points, like an advantage or a skill or something like that. Once again, in the book, it tells you how many points on a story you need to increase something. The big thing here to consider is, as a GM writing a story, do you want there to be mystery or not? Now, there are advantages to all of this. I mean, if you don't want to tell your players what the goal of the story is, then it adds a little air of mystery. It can cause some unexpected twists to pop up that they weren't seeing. However, I would also suggest that you don't do this too often. It's underestimated how effective telling your players what the goal of the story is helpful. Because if you look at your players and go, okay, here's the story, here's the goal. Some of those players will go, that's our goal, I'm fighting for that, this is what I'm heading towards. It gives them a drive, it gives them a point to get to. Really, this all just depends on who you're playing with and how well you know your players. If they're the type who like mystery and figuring it out on their own, that's one thing. If they're ones who need a little guidance, maybe giving them the goal that they can head towards is a good thing. Now, there's a few different types of GM stories. There's going to be season stories, which, I mean, if you think of your game as like a television series, a season is going to be, a seasonal arc. It's usually like a 4 or 5-step story that happens over a long period of time. It's not going to take one session to complete. It's going to take quite a few game sessions to actually finish that story. There's also episode stories, which, once again, if we're thinking of it like a TV show, an episode story is one arc. It's a story that just takes place in that one session, or possibly 2 sessions. You don't have to try and jam it all into one session, but it could be a 2-parter. But they're usually, from what the book says, a good benchmark is they should have like 1 step for every 2 hours. So if you plan on running like a 4-hour session, they're probably going to have a 2-step story for a single episode. But that's just rule of thumb. Play with it, see what you like. There's also character stories, and that's going to be very character-driven, like NPC stories, like the heroes working with a specific NPC. They learn a little bit of their backstory, their history, what drives them. They're very... if you've ever seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a series that... or an episode that focused on Buffy helping out one of her allies, or a side character, is typically what you would consider a character story. It is when the heroes take interest in an NPC. Once again, they're usually like 2-3-step stories. And then there's also retroactive stories. Now, these are a little different. This is basically if the GM goes, I did not do my homework, I forgot to prepare stories for this session, or, the players went in a direction you weren't expecting, and they ended up completing a goal that you didn't have laid out, really. So a retroactive story is basically when the session is over, you go back and go, okay, so you did this story, and then you figure out how many steps that story was and what the conclusion was. It's basically just working backwards. That way they at least get some reward for something. But yeah, that's the basics behind GM stories. Once again, there'll be more in the book, but that should help you organize it and set it out in your head a little bit better. Alright, so that was another episode of Navigating the Game. If you enjoy this content, you like learning how RPGs work, and you don't really learn well from reading from the book, or you want to learn a little bit about the game before you buy it, Feel free to like and subscribe to this channel. I plan on doing a lot more of these series where I kind of go over how a game works to help you kind of get into it a little bit faster rather than spending an entire evening reading the entire book, or maybe just using it for highlights. So yeah, like and subscribe. It would help me out. It would help everything out. I talk about tabletop RPGs a lot, so there should be a lot for you to like if you like that sort of thing. Down below, I will have a link to Drive-Thru RPG. It'll be a link to the 7th Sea book. It is an affiliate link, which means if you click on it, I get 5% of any purchases you make on Drive-Thru RPG within the next 15 days. So, you know, that would also help the channel out. It would help me afford some better equipment, and, you know, food. So, I would appreciate that. Also, in the next video, I'm going to be continuing navigating the game. I'm just going to cover some odds and ends, like small systems that go throughout the game, like sailing and corruption and things like that. And then after that episode, I'm actually planning on moving into an investigation of the world in which 7th Sea takes place, where I'll be talking about the history of Thay, the nature of the different countries. And the reason I do this, it helps GMs who are auditory learners, or once again, who don't have time to pore through the books, learn a little bit about the setting, and it helps players who are just building characters, and they can look at the video that says Inish More, and it's like, this is where I want my character to come from. I'm going to listen to this video, and I'm going to learn about the history of where my character comes from, so they can build their character a little more in-world. So yeah, that's what's coming on the channel next. Yeah, so thank you for being here, and I hope you join me for the rest of this journey.